I'm a 22-year-old woman, and about a month ago, I was searching for a couch on Craigslist for my new apartment. I found what I thought was a great deal. The pictures showed a couch in excellent condition, and the price was right. The seller asked to be contacted through email. His address was something weird like wildwolf999@hotmail.com. The name made me a little uncomfortable, but I went ahead and sent him an offer anyway. Within 10 minutes, he replied, accepting my offer and immediately asking for my home address. I was hesitant to give a stranger my address, so I suggested picking up the couch at his place instead. He kept insisting that he bring it to my house, which felt strange, so I stopped replying. The next day, he sent me his address, which wasn't too far from where I lived. Even though I had doubts, it seemed like such a good deal that I decided to check it out. I drove over to his place and noticed right away that his house looked much smaller and run down compared to the other houses on the street. When I rang the doorbell, a middle-aged man wearing a baseball cap answered. He greeted me with an overly friendly smile and invited me inside. As soon as I stepped in, I felt uneasy. He led me to the living room, where I saw the couch. But it looked nothing like the pictures. There were scuff marks and small tears all over it. I pointed this out, and he just smiled, offering to lower the price. I told him I wasn't interested and started heading for the door. That's when things got really creepy. He suddenly put his hand on my shoulder and said I could have the couch for free if I was willing to give him something in return. Disgusted, I quickly pushed past him and rushed to my car. I didn't even glance back. I just drove away as fast as I could. But the nightmare didn't end there. Later that night, as I was lying in bed watching TV, I thought I heard someone walking up the steps of my porch. I muted the TV and clearly heard someone messing with the front doorknob. My heart sank. I tiptoed over to the door and looked through the peephole, but whoever it was had already disappeared. Then, I heard the gate to my backyard creak open. Panicked, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Moments later, I heard someone at the back door, trying to open it. I shouted that the police were on their way, and suddenly, everything went quiet. I heard the gate close, and just like that, they were gone. It's been a month since that night, and nothing else has happened. But I still can't shake the feeling of fear. I'm convinced the man who sold the couch followed me home. There's no way this was just a coincidence. Needless to say, I'm never using Craigslist again, and I'm still looking for a new apartment where I can feel safe. I was looking to buy a car for my son's 20th birthday, searching through all the usual websites. Most of the cars were overpriced, as expected. Then I turned to Craigslist, hoping to find a better deal. After about a week of searching, I came across a 2006 Toyota Wish. No accidents, no damage, and in great condition, all for just $5,500. It sounded too good to be true, especially for such a reliable car. The seller lived only 5 miles away, which was convenient, so I gave him a call to set up a time to check it out. The guy on the phone sounded perfectly normal. He introduced himself as Tom and assured me that there were no issues with the car. Confident that this could be the one, I brought along $5,500 in cash, even though I planned to negotiate the price. I arrived at Tom's place about 25 minutes early. It was a small, old house on a decent-sized property, but it was a bit isolated, with the nearest neighbors some distance away. The garage was open, so I walked over to see if anyone was there. It was empty, aside from an odd amount of car parts scattered around. Strangely, there was no sign of the car. The only vehicle on the property was an old, beat-up pickup truck. Confused, I walked up to the front door to double-check the address. It was the correct place, but there was no doorbell, so I knocked. After knocking for 5 minutes with no response, I decided to call him again. When I dialed his number, I could hear a phone ringing inside the house. At this point, I was really confused. If he was home, why wasn't he answering? I decided to take a quick peek through one of the windows. Inside, it was pretty dark, but I could make out an old dining room set. And then, across the room, I saw someone standing at the back door, staring outside. Assuming this was Tom, I knocked on the window to get his attention. He didn't move. It was strange, but I figured maybe he hadn't heard me. Since the backyard wasn't fenced off, I decided to walk around to the back door. When I reached the door, I realized something that made my heart stop. The figure standing there wasn't a person. It was a human figure, but it had been taxidermied. I didn't waste a second. I turned and ran as fast as I could back to my car. When I glanced back before getting in, I noticed that the blinds on the window I had looked through were now closed. And through the gaps, I could see someone watching me. I floored it out of there, and I've never looked back. To this day, the whole experience makes no sense. The car parts, the missing Honda, the taxidermied figure. The fact that there was no car at all leads me to believe that whoever Tom was, he wasn't planning on selling me anything. And that's a terrifying thought. I was probably one bad decision away from becoming another lifeless figure in that house. Some time ago, I was on the hunt for an iPhone 8. After searching around online, I found a guy on Craigslist selling his for $300. He claimed it was in perfect condition and that he was upgrading to the iPhone XR. Not being super tech savvy, I decided to bring my younger brother with me. He knew more about testing phones than I did. We agreed to meet at a diner parking lot around 11 o'clock at night, halfway between where we both lived. When we pulled in, two big, intimidating guys stepped out of a black Honda Accord and walked over to us. One of them pulled out the iPhone and handed it to me. It looked flawless, not a scratch on it. My brother popped my SIM card into the phone and ran a few tests. Everything seemed to work fine, so I was ready to make the deal. That's when the guy asked for $350, even though his original listing said $300. I told him I only had $300 on me, which was a lie. I had brought the full $350 but didn't want to pay more than we agreed on. He didn't seem too happy, but eventually he accepted the $300, and he and his friend got back in their car. We sat in my car for a few minutes, testing out the phone more. My brother pointed out that the two guys were still in their car and hadn't left. I didn't think much of it at the time. Eventually, I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. But just as I did, they started their car and followed us. I didn't find it too weird at first. Maybe they were just heading in the same direction. But as we drove down the highway, they stayed right behind us. My brother started to get nervous and said something felt off. Every turn I made, they followed closely behind. My brother suggested we pull over, but I wasn't about to stop. I knew they were looking for trouble. I started driving faster, trying to lose them, but no matter what I did, they stayed on my tail. It got to the point where I was driving recklessly to try and shake them. Finally, I took a big risk. At a red light, I floored it and sped through the intersection before any cars could cross. My brother shouted at me, calling me crazy, but it worked. The black Honda didn't follow. We eventually made it home, but my heart was still pounding from the chase. I was just glad I got away and had a working phone for a good price. Later that night, I was in my room, setting up the new phone. Everyone else in the house was asleep by then. That's when I heard the sound of two car doors slamming shut outside. My stomach dropped. I looked out the window, and there it was, the black Honda Accord parked across the street. I knew it had to be those two guys. I ran to wake up my dad, explaining everything in a panic. He grabbed a baseball bat and crouched behind the front door. A loud knock came from outside. My dad yelled at them to leave, but one of the guys claimed he had a gun and threatened to shoot the lock off if we didn't open the door. Terrified, my dad told me to call Tim, our neighbor who lived 2 doors down and happened to be a police officer. I called him, and he told us to stay hidden. He'd be right over. What happened next still scares me to this day. I heard a muffled gunshot, and when I peeked over, I saw a bullet hole in our front door, just inches from where my dad had been standing. My dad ran back, and we listened as Tim arrived outside, yelling at them to drop their weapons. The two men lowered their guns, and Tim arrested them on the spot. Looking back, that was easily the scariest night of my life. But when it was all over, it was also the most relieved I'd ever felt.